back with Judith Very Baker. And Judith, you were about to talk about this clandestine secret linear accelerator and how you met Dr. Mary Sherman and came to work with her. Can you address that?
I'll do it briefly.
If you
Basically, I met Mary first at David Ferry's party that David Ferry was holding, and she didn't want to speak to me at that time because it would look like maybe, since he had a lot of homosexuals there, maybe they'd think it was a lesbian relationship. So, and I didn't know that. She just walked out and wouldn't speak to me. So I was very glad when she invited me for lunch and then explained basically all of that. And David Ferry was there. They explained the situation about the linear particle accelerator, for example. That was a secret project. It was being guarded by Marines, apparently, outside certainly their personnel, their armed forces of some kind out there. They weren't armed, but they were there guarding. And inside, basically, the materials that they'd been working on for a whole year before I got involved. Started on March 23rd, 1962.
But why was the military guarding?
Because this is an extremely expensive, huge, important piece of equipment, one of the few in existence. And it could be used in many different ways. In this case, it's being used to help create a biological weapon.
And this was located
They want this is in the infectious disease laboratory on the campus of with it was a crippled children's hospital, and then the U.S. Public Health Service, and this was the infectious laboratory lab building there, and that's where it was located. We have gone inside and photographed it, and you can still see remnants of how it was, until recently, you could see remnants of how it had been located there. But they took it all down after the violent death of Mary Sherman.
But this was being used to create cancer, weaponized?
Yes, what we're doing is using, basically radiation at tremendous speeds to create genetic variations and you're mutating things very rapidly. And they were doing a lot of it. It was actually like a shotgun, just like shooting with a shotgun, hoping you're going to get new varieties of material. And you can do it very quickly this way, and nobody knows about it. You see, at that time they had licenses you had to get from the Atomic Energy Commission to do any certain project. You had a license for this, and you had to review boards and all this. So they went around all that by using this linear particle accelerator and used it very quickly. In 5 minutes, you could get what you wanted.
So can you describe that process a little bit about how?
Well, you're directing a beam of electrodes, radiation, charged particles, and genetic material, and it's going to change it. And how it mutates it, and it was already cancerous. Then we're going to inject this, change these. It's a cocktail, really, of all of these. We don't even care what they are anymore. We don't know what they are anymore. We're going to inject these into mice, and the ones that grow the fastest cancers, the biggest cancers, the most vigorous cancers, we take those cancers, we weigh them, and all that, and select them, start some cell cultures, grow these cells, and they're going to be zapped with radiation again. They've been doing this for a whole year. We did it for a few more months. I was actually advising them. They had hit some, I was a speed reader, so I'm reading tons of journals.
When did it become apparent to you?
They needed.
When did it become apparent to you that this weaponized cancer was going to be targeted to Fidel Castro?
Almost immediately. It was okay because I was so anti-Castro. And I was basically asked to join.
And tell us again about the process. What did this
linear? You got to understand that these labs were separated from each other.
Right. And
by having a lab that is completely different from the others, very primitive. I'd worked under primitive conditions before, and used radiation. I knew how to handle safely these monkey viruses, but it stopped the doctors from completing the ring and knowing about each other by moving it out like that. And so when they got material, they didn't know where it came from. Dr. Sherman wants this done. And then it goes on, this lab says, take it on to this lab. Finally, we're getting back to the linear particle accelerator. She has selected the materials that look most promising, and they're going to put them through the radiation again and bake it again. So we don't even know in the end and you cannot trace it back to any origin, you see, by mixing it all up like that. Nobody is going to be blamed for this material. Nobody is going to be able to be fingered. It can even look wild.
So your role in this was to take the
Well, I was selecting the heaviest cancers. I had to check them under the microscope to make sure they're the proper kind, and then start cell cultures, or tissue cultures. And then we would take, besides the tissue cultures, we would macerate all these tumors, and we'd pull out the liquid, basically, that contains the viruses. And the viruses would be sent off again. We had the test tubes sent off because those are the types of cancers that were being produced from the largest tumors, and we had to keep them alive. Because you might go too far, you might end up with, it might be a dead end, you know. Anyway, it worked.
I'm looking at a picture here
Yes.
of Dr. Mary Sherman's body. Can you tell us about the mysterious death of Dr. Mary Sherman? There have been reports that she was burned up in a fire in her apartment,
but you've looked at the picture now.
I'm looking at the picture, and it is obvious that's not what happened. We can't show the picture.
No, we're not
on video, but if you will talk about that.
Yes, I will be happy to, because she was my friend and she was murdered. Excuse me. Mary Sherman was a very brave woman who actually supported the anti-Castro movement. She would go out there and work with the rebels, the guerrillas, and give them medical care, and actually donated materials and literal money. Mary Sherman herself was a very brave woman, and when after we had created this material, they were still working on it when I left. In 1967, they were still probably refining this. Now, we had already created a biological weapon, but refining, how do you make it so it's not traceable at all? Mary Sherman, we know, died July 21st, 1964. They said it was a house fire, and they never mentioned in the papers that her right arm was missing. They just said she died in a house fire. It looked like a lesbian attack, sex attack. She was not a lesbian. She was and she was a very gracious woman who was absolutely, had a regular kind of life, and wasn't interested in that kind of thing. And I'm not saying anything against people who do that, I'm just saying that was not her. They use that as an excuse. The man who found her body, or I should say saw smoke, called the police first instead of calling the fire department.
That's from her apartment.
That's right. See smoke coming out. And this person's very suspicious to us. We're going to have Edward T. Haslam will write an entire book about Mary Sherman's death. That's how important it is. But I'll tell you one thing. The Warren Commission came to town that morning. She was front page news. You've got to understand there was a trio of deaths that happened that stopped people, including myself, if I'd been able to be approached, from speaking about these projects and what we were doing. Mary Sherman died on the 21st of July. Guy Bannister, who Lee worked with and who was working with Bobby Kennedy on one aspect of the anti-Castro movement, former head of the FBI in Chicago, had like 500 agents working for him. He's not supposed to know that Lee Oswald has an office in the same building with him. In my book, I explain exactly that Lee does have an office. Anyway, he dies. That's in June. In May, Bannister's pilot, who actually got Lee to Houston before he goes to Mexico City, his plane explodes in Mexico with the mayor, the former mayor of New Orleans, aboard, who also knew about our project. So you have 3 in a row deaths stopping everybody from talking in New Orleans. But yet the Warren Commission did go to New Orleans. Think about that. They went to Washington, of course. They went to Dallas, and they went to New Orleans. So you've got to ask yourself, why was it so important?
Let's stop right here for a moment and come back to Dr. Mary Sherman and the mysterious death. I'm looking at her body. When we say her right arm was missing, her right arm is charred, and it is just below the shoulder, and all the bone has been disintegrated.
Absolutely
It has been
vaporized.
is the word, and in order to vaporize bone, it has been verified through crematoriums, you've got to get up to at least 5,000 degrees. Now, if you're at 5,000, you got a spark of 5,000 degrees in an apartment, that whole thing's going to burn up to the center in just a minute. So,
and her hair wasn't even burned.
No, her hair is not even singed, but her lower torso and her arm is charcoal.
And of course, the curtains in her apartment were not burned.
Yeah, the curtains
either.
didn't even catch on fire.
Therefore,
So she was
brought in there.
She was
a charred body.
That's right. She was died elsewhere, and then there was a stab wound to her heart where there had been blood traces, but there were other stab wounds to her body. It looks as if once rigor mortis had set in, so that body had been moved to her apartment to cover it up, because if it had been discovered there or had been alerted, the authorities had been alerted there, then the linear accelerator, which was supposed to be top secret, would have been discovered.
So it looks like she was eliminated. Now, I would have been eliminated too, and others, if we had spoken out. And of course, I was told to be quiet, to be a vanilla girl, or that would be the end of me. And I was kicked out of cancer research because I objected to the poor ethics, the fact that volunteers for the to test this material on were not being told that if it killed them that we were successful, you know, and that they're not going to volunteer for something that's going to kill them.
And that was volunteers at a prison.
From a prison.
And the volunteers didn't really know what they were volunteering for.
No.
And they were volunteers for this cancer test, weaponized cancer, so it would be given to some and not to others, and then you would time how fast they would die. Can you name the prison that this happened at?
Of course, well, they were sent from Angola prison up to Jackson Mental Hospital. That's, by the way, is the same hospital where you find that there. You may have seen Rose Cherami is thrown out of a car. You see that in the beginning of the film JFK.
Yes, yes.
They're going to kill Kennedy. They take her to the Jackson Mental Hospital where everything's kept tight. All of this is connected with the Kennedy assassination. Lee Oswald knows so much, they've got to get rid of him. He is actually the person who couriers the material to Mexico City. Understand that Lee Oswald...
When you say materials, you're talking about this fast-growing
I'm talking about, yes, we have it. And Oxner had all these connections for years and years with doctors in Cuba. He'd been training doctors. He had Brent House. It was filled like with 500 Cubans and Mexicans and Central and South American young men who were being trained to become doctors through Oxner Clinic. And, all right, look, I just want to go quickly. Lee Oswald, after he does all this campaigning and everything, and he's on television, he's doing all of this stuff, suddenly he goes silent. He's sitting on his porch reading for 6 weeks. What's going on? Waiting for the prisoner to die. Now, and he doesn't want any publicity. We inject the prisoners were injected. You find out that the Clinton witnesses saw Clay Shaw, David Ferrie, and Lee Oswald, and they're sitting there and they can't move. They're strapped, trapped, because they're waiting for a phone call, because these prisoners are being brought by convoy up to Jackson. Before they get there, all these, they have to have this Cadillac join the convoy so they can go in, bring the materials in, nobody will understand. After that, Lee Oswald has to wait. 28 days later, the prisoner dies, at least one. Now he's ready to go to Mexico City.
And he's going to Mexico City to
and
meet
he's got
somebody.
a 2 week, yeah, get that. He's going to hand off this material. Now he tries desperately himself.
He's going to hand it off to a Cuban who's going to take it back
to
Cuba. And
that person did not show up. He was left out to dry. He tries himself to, because if we can kill Castro in time, and we still have time, they'd turn their energies, the people who wanted to kill Kennedy, we already knew that they would instead turn their energies to invading Cuba, getting their glory, putting Kennedy under pressure to do what they wanted, getting more control of Kennedy. And what are you going to have? Lee Oswald is there with a 2-week visa. And you know what? After a few days, he leaves. Why? He can't hand off the material. It has a short shelf life, and it dies. So he leaves it. That's why he comes back. He's supposed to be desperate to get to Cuba, but he leaves. Once he is in, this is the end part, once he is in Dallas, and he's waiting, 2 weeks after he gets there, he gets the transit visa.
And may
So he can go back.
May I stop
But he
here?
ignores it.
May I stop here for our
Yeah.
second? We have another segment coming up, and we're really very anxious to
Yeah.
hear this part of it. So thank you very much, and we'll return shortly.